I don't know whether Bryce Young is going to become a good quarterback or not. I know 100% that C.J. Stroud already is a top 10 quarterback, maybe a top 5 quarterback.
Hey, I thought it was all over.
Okay. Yep, this is Mike Florio talking about the Carolina Panthers. Of course, when he's talking about us, it's never good. So we're going to jump right into it, hear his thoughts, give you a little bit of my thoughts too, but I'm going to try and kind of let him and her talk.
The Carolina Panthers, another team that has become irrelevant except for the days when their owner throws a drink on a paying customer in Jacksonville. They have a new general manager, and this is the guy that there was always that kind of buzz that it's going to be him, and it wasn't really talked about much because, again, nobody cares about the Carolina Panthers right now but Dan Morgan, and he's been a name that's been on the fringes, a guy who's got the potential to be a rising star. Wasn't he a first-round pick? Wasn't he a first-round pick out of the University of Miami?
Yeah.
He was, yeah. Played a long time in the NFL, had concussion issues and retired, got into personnel, worked his way up, and here he is now, the new general manager of the Carolina Panthers. Now, look, my condolences in advance to anybody who has to work with David Tepper. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to kiss the ring.
And that's to be the thing. So many people are just kissing the ring. We heard about it in the Athletic article about people just doing whatever they can, going with Fitterer behind the head coach's back, and so much more. It's a problem. And if David wants to continue to harbor or grow a organization that is okay with backstabbing, then this organization is never going to get better. In fact, depending on where we go head coach wise, I would be willing to bet that we don't even double or triple our wins. I mean, that's saying, you're expecting double or triple. Oh my God, 10, 12. No, triple our wins would be 6 wins. And I think that, man, we're really far away from that right now. And, the whole Dan Morgan hire does not inspire confidence in me personally.
Of the oligarch who sees fit to throw his drink on somebody. And we have seen many examples from David Tepper in recent months that allow us to say, with as much deference to the king as we can, that the king is riding buck naked on a horse down the street and somebody needs to tell him. Maybe Dan Morgan will tell him. Physically, Dan Morgan can handle himself with David Tepper. I would take Dan Morgan in any and all competitions involving brawn, not necessarily brain, when it comes to David Tepper. So maybe this is what David Tepper needs. Somebody who is just physically strong enough to ignore David Tepper. That's ultimately what the Panthers require. And I don't think David Tepper's undergone some epiphany where all of a sudden he's going to get out of football. You take those jobs in Carolina knowing that you're going to have this guy who's a drive-by owner, who's paying attention to his hedge fund, thinks he knows more than he knows. You got to navigate around him and the inherent stress, that feeling when you walk into the building every day. Oh God, what's it going to be today from the boss? What's he going to want? What's he going to do? And he's clueless as to how that affects the ability of his employees to do their jobs the right way. I'm sorry, but again, we have to keep it real here. So congratulations to Dan Morgan, or condolences. I'm not sure which one yet.
I would agree with everything that he said, to be honest with you. Florio hits it directly on the head. There's Tepper's too involved. He doesn't know what he's doing. If he was a serious owner, he would have gone out there and done what the Josh Harris group did in Washington and went out and got Adam Peters. Instead, we internally hire from arguably the worst season that the Carolina Panthers have ever had. So I do not understand that. I personally believe it is to close ranks, because if he does not, a lot of his antics and stuff will come out and then it will become a problem. But again, I do not have faith in anything David Tepper does because I 100% believe that this whole hiring of Sportsology and everything like that was a front. It is essentially a way to, take his hands off the wheel while still absolutely having them death grip white knuckled on the wheel.
I'm not sure, Mike, that they had a lot of other options outside of Dan Morgan. You say, well, he was the best option because he's been there and he knows what's going on there and he can work with David Tepper. He knows what he's getting into. But I have to tell you, if I'm a big time GM candidate for some of these teams, I'm probably not going to go to Carolina for a lot of reasons, but David Tepper being the main reason. And I did see that they plan on hiring an intermediary between Dan Morgan and David Tepper, and I think that's a great idea. They need somebody that David Tepper's not always going to Dan Morgan, that he's going to somebody else, and Dan Morgan doesn't have to deal with David Tepper on a daily basis. Now, will it work or not? I don't know.
Real quick, okay. I know that Bill Belichick has had quite a few interviews with the Atlanta Falcons. All signs are pointing to him signing there. And in fact, the newest rumor this morning, the 23rd, is that the Harbaugh to the Chargers deal is all but done. If you need an intermediary with GM, does that not reflect, follow me here, Bill Belichick? Canales as OC, Bill as HC and play calling DC. Just put somebody else in there as the day-to-day DC. Obviously, Bill will take care of most of it, but you still want to have somebody in there. And then Bill is the intermediary between the owner and the GM. So this way, Bill still has a little bit of control in the GM, but not total control.
Based on what we've seen with David Tepper over the last year, maybe not. David Tepper might still continue to go to Dan Morgan over and over and over again. But I don't just know how many options, Mike, that this team had for their GM position, considering if you had other options, I'm not sure the Panthers and David Tepper are the team that you wanted to go to.
And look,
I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Everybody thinks that the Frank Reich firing, the stuff getting thrown, that athletic article isn't hurting future hires. You're crazy. I told you it would. Everybody said I didn't know shit about it. Yep, you guys are here holding that L right now. So
ordinarily, I would say that if the intermediary between the owner and the GM isn't a football person, now if that person is a football person, that person should just be the GM. But
what if it's Bill Belichick?
If the intermediary is a business person, a Rich McKay type, although Rich McKay was a GM before, he's not anymore, but he's the intermediary between the coach and GM of the Falcons to Arthur Blank, which could be one of the issues keeping Bill Belichick from ultimately taking that job unless they change that structure. I still don't like that. I don't like having the person who's in a job that is kind of part of football operations and kind of isn't. Because when things go well, that person takes credit. When things don't go well, that person says, I'm not in football operations. And it just creates the potential for in-house dysfunction. I think so much of what's lacking with so many of the dysfunctional teams. This is that dynamic again, folks, of the $10 billion business that's run like a family-owned food truck. You've got a mom-and-pop operation, and the folks who are just I was just minding my own business. Dad died, and he left me the team, right? So,
yeah, and if you guys know anything about business, accounting, or anything of that, the one thing that they're going to tell you is internal controls. You need to be able to figure out, have checks and balances inside of your organization and everything like that to, be able to exist long term. And Tepper does not have those internal controls. He is a authoritarian fourth grade dictator when it comes to this team, and that's why we are losing. We're losing because of David Tepper. And of course, again, I'm not going to touch on it here, Nicole Tepper, because apparently she's involved with it as well.
They don't necessarily understand how to make a properly functioning football operation. A properly functioning football operation does not have opportunities for people when the going gets tough to start blaming each other.
Which is the athletic article. That athletic article said that they were doing everything they can to protect themselves. Almost every coach that was hired, and it was all against the head coach.
Pointing fingers and trying to protect themselves. I guess that's true in any business, but in this business, they're all winning as it relates to money. They're not winning on the field, and that's when the dysfunction begins to emerge. Having that buffer between the owner and the GM can create problems. That said, when your owner is David Tepper, maybe it's good. Maybe anybody throw a rock and hit somebody. This is the person I report to every day. As long as it's not David Tepper, good. let's do it. But you're right. It's not an attractive job. This is, and see, this is, you've got the segment of the media that is so wired to kiss butt that everything, they find a positive in everything because they feel like they're part of this effort to promote the NFL to everyone in a positive light. And that's not what our jobs are. But you'll hear this from time to time. Well, there's only 32 of these jobs. This is a great job because there's only 32 of them.
And that was the biggest argument to people, man. Oh, people are going to want this Panthers head coaching position because there's only 32 jobs. I don't think Mike Florio agrees with that sentiment.
It doesn't mean it's a great job. Yeah, there's only 32 of them. That doesn't mean they're all great. That doesn't mean every circumstance is great. There are bad and there are good. And this is bad. Right now, this is bad. David Tepper has made it bad. He has made it undesirable. So what happens is, yes, you'll find somebody who'll take it, but if you've got somebody who's got options, they're not going to opt to go there. You're going to get somebody that has nowhere else to go. Have we seen Dan Morgan's name on the interview list for the Chargers or the Raiders? I haven't seen it. Nothing against Dan Morgan. And again, he's regarded as a guy who at some point was going to be a GM. Maybe he's getting there a little early.
Yeah, I do agree that it's early, but it makes sense. It makes sense that we weren't really interviewing as many GMs, and that's probably because Tepper made the decision before anything or before anybody had an idea, and he was like, Dan's going to be our guy. Because if that's the case, Dan has been involved with these head coach, DC, OC interviews. And if that's the case and he wasn't named it, I feel like there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there, but maybe it's just me. I don't know. I want to know your thoughts. Drop them in the comments below.
Because he just happened to be the guy who already was working there, and he kind of fell into the job when Scott Fitterer was fired. And now, again, David Tepper needs someone to take the job. So I hope Dan Morgan does well. I hope they change the narrative. I hope for the best, but I'm prepared for the worst.
And I find it interesting, Mike. They hired an outside consulting firm, and they ended up hiring in-house. So that tells you something right there. And on the one hand, Dan Morgan, it makes perfect sense. On the other hand, he was at least partly responsible for that roster that the Panthers put together for this season.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Miss Williams. Thank you. Keep preaching.
And let me just tell you, it was not a good roster. And
when it wasn't a good roster? Preseason week 1. When it wasn't a good roster? Week 1. This roster wasn't good before the season started. So the idea that 8, 10, or anything more than 5 or 6 wins was crazy to say.
Pick of Bryce Young, obviously right now after one season, does not look like the right pick. When they had their choice of quarterbacks and they picked Bryce Young over CJ Stroud, I don't know whether Bryce Young is going to become a good quarterback or not. I know 100% that CJ Stroud already is a top 10 quarterback, maybe a top 5 quarterback after one season. I know what CJ Stroud is. I know that you should have picked CJ Stroud with the number 1 overall pick. So how much was he responsible for that choice of CJ Stroud, of Bryce Young over CJ Stroud? I think that was probably David Tepper's pick, but they got to keep David Tepper out of the draft.
Yes, it was David Tepper's pick. Athletic reported that Tepper was involved with it, that Nicole Tepper, again, I'm not going to touch on her. It's just not something I want to talk about. But she apparently liked him. So all signs point to the Teppers overruling the decision of Josh McCown, Deuce Staley, Frank Reich, and rumored to be Dan Morgan. So the 3 of those 4 people were fired. And yet you promote Dan Morgan, the guy that wanted Stroud. Makes no sense to me. I'm telling you, this is a closing ranks. And if we end up with something weird, again, like my weird tinfoil hat theory that now that you need a bridge between the owner and the GM, Bill Belichick calls defensive plays. You still have a DC. Let Canales call offensive plays and just let it roll from there. I think Billy B is going to sign in Atlanta, but that would make sense as like a kind of, he's involved with personnel, but not because there's a GM. So
out of the draft room, out of whatever they're doing, if Dan Morgan wants to succeed, it's got to be his picks, not David Tepper's picks.
Didn't you hear, though? It was unanimous. It was unanimous. That was according to David
right.
Tepper. It was unanimous.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted Bryce Young. And if it was unanimous, here's how it became unanimous.
I can't wait for this. Mike Florio, please cook for me right here, buddy.
David Tepper was making it known internally what his preference is. So if you want to be perceived as somebody who gets along with the owner, that's your preference too. That's one of the realities of a dysfunctional football operation. And I'm sorry, fans, you're stuck with David Tepper until he's no longer the owner. Whether he sells, whether he retires, whether he dies, you're stuck with the owner. You can't fire the owner. That's what Jed York said several years ago, and he's absolutely right. And I feel for the fan bases out there that are owned by dysfunctional ownership groups. And as I've said many times, there is no test. You got to take 2 tests to be able to drive a car. There is no test that you have to take to own a $10 billion NFL franchise. It is sad, and it is also one of the reasons I love covering this sport, because it adds layers and levels of intrigue and drama. And I don't want to say uncertainty, because after 20 years, you realize it's not uncertain. The dysfunctional teams will indeed do dysfunctional things. The next dysfunctional thing the Panthers will have to do is hire a head coach. There are many candidates. They need ultimately someone who's going to get the most out of Bryce Young. David Tepper has said that. It's not like they're going to bring in somebody who says, okay, you know what you want, you know what you need to do? The first thing you need to do is get a quarterback who isn't 5'11". That's not what they're looking for.
Or follow me here. Follow me just real quick. We're going to walk down the street. There's a certain team that's going to draft number 1 with the Carolina pick this year. It's the Chicago Bears. They're most likely to go get Caleb Williams or Drake May. All signs are pointing to Caleb right now. Okay. So they go draft Caleb number 1. They also don't need their quarterback, Justin Fields. So why don't the Carolina Panthers trade Bryce Young? This is, again, just a crazy. It's, a noon here. And I'm just spitballing here. There's going to be some people that need to be paid, that need a lot of things taken care of. Bryce Young or Justin Jefferson. Then use our 33rd pick or a later pick, a future pick, whatever you want, to go grab Justin Fields. We're probably just going to have to give a 2 for him. I don't think he's going to need a 1. But then you roll forwards with Jay Jettas, Justin Fields, Chuba Hubbard, and Miles Sanders, of course. Rebuild the offensive line, work that. We have a taller, thicker, more mobile quarterback that we can build. We have a true number 1 wide receiver, and we didn't really sacrifice a ton of draft capital for it. Again, if we decide to not use the 33rd pick, we decide to do a second-round pick next year, maybe a second-round pick in 25, 26, whatever, and do it that way, then we could still use 33 to probably go get an offensive lineman. Mingo, Jay Jettas, bring in, 1 or 2 other guys, and that's a pretty solid wide receiver core. Justin Fields will be able to get the ball out and everything like that. Obviously, we're going to stick with Bryce. That's the better of the options. But I'm interested to see where we can wheel and deal and maybe come up with something a little bit bigger. I'm just foresee, like he said, dysfunctional franchises stay dysfunctional, and I do not see the Carolina Panthers coming out of this rut for a minute.
They're looking for somebody who genuinely believes in Bryce Young and who has a plan for getting the most out of him. So next year, everyone will be saying, maybe they didn't draft the wrong guy. No pressure, new head coach. But, Charean, I don't know how there's no litmus test for that. There's no truth serum that can be applied here to a head coach who, maybe believes, as many do, it's pretty good to be 6'2", 6'3", 6'4" if you're going to be a quarterback in the NFL. So I don't know where they go next. I don't think they know where they go next, but they obviously need somebody that's going to get more out of Bryce Young.
Well, Dave Canellis makes perfect sense. Been in the same division, worked with the short quarterback in Baker Mayfield, and he has a history with Dan Morgan. They worked together in Seattle. He makes perfect sense to this team. I don't know if that's the direction they go. Dan Quinn also has a relationship with Dan Morgan from their Seattle days. But I'm with you. This is a team that has to go offense, has to hire an offensive guy for this job. But to me, Dave Canellis just makes perfect sense with his relationship with Dan Morgan, the fact that he's coached in the same division, and the fact that he's had a quarterback similar to Bryce Young in Baker Mayfield that he made look, frankly, really good this season. I don't know if they can do better than Dave Canales. Again, you're rolling the dice, Mike. We don't know how he's going to be as a head coach, but I do know he got the most out of Baker Mayfield this season.
Watch your back, Todd Bowles. You know what happens in Tampa Bay when a defensive head coach has an offensive coordinator who starts getting sniffs for head coaching jobs elsewhere when he's just done a great job with a new quarterback. You know what happens. Just ask Lovie Smith what happens in those situations. So I'm not saying that's going to happen in Tampa. All I'm saying is they've done it before, or at least some believe that's exactly what happened when Lovie Smith was fired and Dirk Cutter got the job after Dirk Cutter showed that he knew how to coach Jameis Winston, or at least he showed enough that they thought he could coach Jameis Winston. They didn't want to lose him to another team. I digress just a little bit. That's the Canales angle, and especially if you're looking at losing Canales in the division. It makes me wonder what Buccaneers ownership will think about Canales moving on, especially when he did a great job getting a lot out of Baker Mayfield in their 1 year together in Tampa Bay. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.
Shout out to Mike Florio. Mike Florio is insightful, and honestly, Charean is as well. She was able to lay us on quite a bit of information, especially when it came to Canales. I didn't know that they had the Dan Morgan connection previously. I'm just fearing that we are going to put so much on this future offensive head coach, and we're going to expect him to immediately come out there. Bryce Young needs to throw, 350 yards, 3 touchdowns, and everything like that, or else it's not a win. I don't think that Dave Canales can take what Tampa did with Baker, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Rashad Wright, and everybody like that, and copy and paste it in Carolina without some massive, massive, massive changes. And I don't think that one off season is enough change. I will continue to pound the table that we should have kept Frank Reich into the off season. Yes, there could have been other things, but that was the first year. We're essentially telling somebody to come into the same role and situation that we put Frank Reich in, and hoping and praying that it doesn't turn out as poorly. If we start this season 1-5, it's not a better season than 0-6. I understand the record. There's 1 win. But if we end up at the end of the year with 2, 3, 4, 5 wins, it's not a measurable jump forward that needed to gut the entire staff, needed a complete rebuild. We were already rebuilding at one point with Fitterer. And again, dysfunctional franchises stay dysfunctional. Shout out Florio. I don't have confidence in Carolina. I don't have confidence in Tepper. I'm still going to remain a Carolina Panthers fan, faithful, and just I'm gonna be here, man. But it's gonna be a tough year. So to all my Carolina Panthers fans out there, stay strong out there. My name is Nick. This has been Roll Coverage. Make sure you subscribe to the socials below. Otherwise, have a great rest of the day. Peace.